Hello, everyone. RJ Game News USA here. And we are back with part two of this mini series I'm doing on the history of the Super Bowl. In this part, we will be covering Super Bowls 11 through 20. I will say that this era transitioned from the early days of the Super Bowl, the merger of the AFL and NFL, the legitimacy of the AFL, and forming of the AFC and NFC conferences. It transitioned from that to the NFL had now overtaken baseball as the most popular sport in America, thus making the Super Bowl the biggest event, sporting wise, in America, even over the World Series. So, with this newfound fame and fortune, with constant expansion, how did the NFL handle Super Bowls 11 through 20? The answer is, for the most part, they crushed it. Now, there were some stinkers in there, but there were also some good games. And we're going to go over each of those Super Bowls now. So if you like this kind of content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. So, Super Bowl 11 took place in Pasadena, California, between the Oakland Raiders and the Minnesota Vikings. The Raiders would win 32-14 in a rather uneventful slog of a game. The Raiders actually put on 16 points in the second quarter, being the only scoring in the first half. What's really notable about this game is this was John Madden's Super Bowl win. A lot of people remember John Madden being an excellent commentator. Prior to that, though, he was a really good head coach. Short-lived, brief run he had, but he did cap off the Super Bowl here. And that's what's most memorable about this Super Bowl, is that John Madden being carried off the field by his players. And they defeated the Vikings with Bud Grant. Bud Grant had been somebody who 4 times now had been in the Super Bowl with the Vikings, and all 4 times the Vikings left empty-handed. They never really came close in any of these 4 Super Bowls. I don't know if it was the weakness of the NFC or what, but they never got over the hump on the big game. So, Bud Grant, Fran Tarkenton, you got to say, missed opportunity to cash in one of those Super Bowls. And Vikings fans are still suffering to this day. The Raiders were happy to get their first Super Bowl win here, for sure. There was 103,000 in attendance, making it one of the most populated Super Bowls of all time. It's really smart to stick it in the Rose Bowl with so many fans that could be in attendance. The MVP was Fred Biletnikoff. So you got to see another wide receiver win MVP just a year after Lynn Swann accomplished it. So, yeah, I don't think the Super Bowl is very memorable other than if you followed the career of John Madden. Let's move on to Super Bowl 12. We had another stinker. The Dallas Cowboys defeated the Denver Broncos 27-10. This game wasn't really close. It wasn't really that competitive at all. This is more memorable for Tom Landry getting a second Super Bowl, Roger Staubach getting a second Super Bowl. In the midst of the Steelers dynasty, where they won 4 out of 6 championships, the Raiders were able to get theirs, and the Cowboys were able to get theirs in this game. And Craig Morton used to be the quarterback for the Cowboys, and he ended up being the quarterback for the Broncos, but he could not defeat his former team. The MVP was Harvey Martin and Randy White, co-MVPs. I hate co-MVPs. I think that's such a fence-sitting issue. But defensive line and defensive tackle, clearly you could tell what happened here. The defense got after him, and that's one of the reasons why the Cowboys won the game. Then we get to the exciting shit. Okay? And what am I talking about? By far, easily the best Super Bowl up to this point. You know, if you go through history, Super Bowl 1 blowout, 2 blowout, 3, any Super Bowl that had double-digit scores, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 was close, right? 6 was double-digit. 7 was kind of close. 8 was double-digit. Super Bowl 9 was double-digit. 10 was kind of close. 11 was double-digit. 12 was double-digit. Haven't had that many close Super Bowls up to this point. Super Bowl 13 was absolute rock star of a Super Bowl. We kind of had a prelude on Super Bowl 10 between Cowboys Steelers and how good that could be. This fully met expectations. All these Hall of Famers, the Cowboys were going for back-to-back. The Steelers are going for their third in 5 years at this point. It was a star-studded matchup in the late 70s. Super Bowl 13 went to the Steelers 35-31 in still one of the top Super Bowls all time. Really is. Definitely the best Super Bowl, the first 20 or so. Honestly, the best Super Bowl, the first 22 Super Bowls was probably this Super Bowl. The MVP was Terry Bradshaw. So, this sort of capped off the rivalry between Bradshaw and Staubach and the Steelers and the Cowboys of this era. The winner of this game would definitely be the team of the 70s, the team of the decade, the dynasty of the decade that we always seem to get, and the Steelers pulled it off. And to this day, the fact the Steelers have 6 Super Bowls and the Cowboys have 5, this had huge historical impact. Just absolute, one of the most historically impactful Super Bowls, because had Staubach won that, he would end up with 3 Super Bowls. We might look at him differently. Maybe he's better than Aikman. Like I said, Cowboys would be the dynasty of that era. Cowboys would have had 3 in the 70s and 3 in the 90s, end up with 6 instead of the Steelers to be tied with the Patriots for the most. So huge historical significance here. But the Steelers won 35-31. Jackie Smith had a huge drop that would have changed this game entirely. And then next you have up Super Bowl 14. These same Steelers went back-to-back, defeating the Los Angeles Rams 31-19. The Rams had no business being there with a 9-7 regular season record. It was shocking they made it this far. It was a complete mismatch. But, believe it or not, going into the fourth quarter, the Rams were winning the game. A little known, little lost piece of history. Everybody kind of remembers this game as being Terry Bradshaw just throwing a party. And he did win MVP. And again, this was in Pasadena. They've had a lot of Super Bowls in the Rose Bowl. I kind of miss it being there, honestly. I think it's a good venue for that. But they were trailing in the fourth quarter before putting up 2 touchdowns and winning the game 31-19. Chuck Noll winning his 4th Super Bowl. Only Belichick has more. The 70 Steelers, in my opinion, is the greatest dynasty. Because, and here's why I'm going to say that, because I'm a Patriots fan. The Patriots dynasty, I feel it's 2 separate dynasties. Young Brady, old Brady. Yeah, they had the connective tissue of Belichick and Brady in between. But if you really look at what dynasties are and how they're broken down, it's core groups of players and coaches in a smaller-ish era, dominating their decade, right? So early 2000s Patriots and late 2010s Patriots are separate teams, man. They're really separate dynasties. So then you have to look at Okay, the Cowboys in the early 90s won 3. Okay, that was pretty good. And the 49ers won 4, like the Steelers did. But the Steelers did it faster. The 49ers had like 4 Super Bowls in 9 years. The Steelers had 4 in 6. Well, then we had the current Chiefs. And at the time of this recording, I don't know who wins this game. Chiefs or Eagles. If the Chiefs do win, if they do win this game, that would be 4 Super Bowls in 6 years to match the Steelers, but also kind of having a three-peat in there. So I think, for now, the Steelers are the best dynasty. We'll see what the Chiefs do at Super Bowl 59. I mean, Steelers were loaded. They had defense, they had coach, they had quarterback, they had receivers, Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. They were absolutely stacked. So that sort of brought a close to the end of the era as we go to the 80s and Super Bowl 15. The Oakland Raiders defeated the Philadelphia Eagles 27-10. This game was largely forgettable, except being the redemption of Jim Plunkett. And he was the MVP of this game. Dick Vermeil was the head coach of the Eagles. Years and years later, he'd get his win back. But I don't have too much to say about Super Bowl 15, honestly. Felt like a transitional year in the NFL. Because Super Bowl 16, we get the start. People didn't know it at the time because they did a lot more winning a little bit later on. But the start of the 49ers dynasty. The San Francisco 49ers defeated the Cincinnati Bengals 26-21 in the Super Bowl. Joe Montana getting his first. He was the MVP. Vegas had it close. They had 49ers favored by 1. This was in a dome. I think a dome is a good place for a Super Bowl. It was in Detroit. 81,000 in attendance. Very good game, 26-21. It was a little sloppy if you actually go back and watch it. It wasn't as good as the future 49ers-Bengals Super Bowl. But I think it was a pretty good Super Bowl. By today's standard, it was all right. By those standards back then, that was a fairly good B-plus Super Bowl for sure. Like, you'd be entertained watching that. And that brings us to Super Bowl 17. This was a strike-shortened season. So it's kind of interesting here. But Washington defeated the Dolphins 27-17. Again, the Dolphins were ahead in the fourth quarter. Washington scored 2 touchdowns to pull it out. Once again, we were in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, where so many Super Bowls were held, especially back then. This is the famous John Riggins run. Some younger football fans don't remember this run very well. I still was not born yet, but I do remember seeing this run quite a bit in the highlights. There's 2 big runs. One was in 17. There was another run by Marcus Allen in Super Bowl 18 that we'll get to in a second that's even more famous. But John Riggins ran somebody over on 4th and 1, scored a touchdown. Don Shula, he went to 6 Super Bowls. Andy Reid has went to 6. Belichick went to 9. But Shula only won 2 of his 6 Super Bowls. So this was another Super Bowl loss for him, the all-time winningest coach, a Mount Rushmore coach guy. Joe Gibbs actually has more Super Bowls than him with 3. Okay? And this was Gibbs' first Super Bowl. He won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. I don't know if another coach could do that. So, like, huge props to Joe Gibbs. This was the first of his 3. And in a strike-shortened season, to get that team going the way that it got going, to be able to win the big game, was impressive. I don't believe Joe Gibbs, though, is a Mount Rushmore coach. To be fair, I know he's got 3 compared to Shula's 2. I think Shula just had more than just Super Bowls to his resume in a longer run of success. To me, the Mount Rushmore of coaches is got to be, and Belichick, still the top guy, right? I honestly think you can make the argument Andy Reid's second right behind him. And then I think you got to go with, I think then it's Lombardi and Shula, right? Those are your top 4. Those are the Mount Rushmore head coaches. Joe Gibbs would be on the second Mount Rushmore, the second tier. He'd be on the tier with your Bill Walsh, your Chuck Knowles, guys like that. Your Tom Landry's. That's your second tier. That's just my opinion. But all 8 of those coaches I just named are really great. They're definitely all-timers. And John Riggins did win the MVP, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. So we go on to Super Bowl 18. These same Redskins, you can't say that name, Washington team that won the Super Bowl was right back in the Super Bowl. Now, they were going against the Los Angeles Raiders. I mean, they relocated from Oakland to LA so many times, it's hard to fucking keep it together. But the Raiders won this game 38-9. It was a total blowout. Marcus Allen was the MVP, and he had a run that even outdid John Riggins' run. Y'all might have seen this one. He takes a handoff or a toss sweep. I can't remember if it's a handoff or a toss sweep. But he goes one direction, he flips around and goes the other, cuts up, touchdown. Total blowout here. The Raiders get their 3rd Super Bowl in 8 years. Jim Plunkett wins his 2nd Super Bowl. Jim Plunkett is the only quarterback who was eligible for the Hall of Fame to not get in after winning 2 Super Bowls. I think that's the correct move. He's not a Hall of Famer. Just stop, guys. He's not a Hall of Famer. He won 2 Super Bowls. Good on him. He ain't a Hall of Famer. Now, we'll see if Eli gets in. I think Eli should get in. We'll find that out shortly. But, not a Hall of Famer. Tom Flores, to me, not a Hall of Famer. So, but, anyway, we're moving on. Super Bowl 19. This had so much hype going into it. The NFL loved the hype going into this game. Too bad the game didn't play out how they wanted. It was January 20th, 1985. The same day has Ronald Reagan's 2nd inauguration. Kind of interesting. 49ers are favored by 3.5, but they won 38-16. Don Shula again. He won those back-to-back Super Bowls with Miami. Super Bowl 7 and 8, and that's all he could muster. Just 2 years ago, he was in a Super Bowl and lost to Washington. He comes back this time with a second-year quarterback that put up a stat line that was unbelievable. 48 touchdowns for Dan Marino that year. And this was Dan Marino's one and only trip to the Super Bowl. He had a losing record in the playoffs. He had a losing record in the playoffs. And Joe Montana ate his lunch and he won Super Bowl MVP. A lot of people, when I was growing up, talked about how great Dan Marino was. Even back then. And I got to see him in the 90s. But I mean in the 80s here. Dan Marino, way ahead of his time, super talented. But for the longest time, considered the best quarterback to never win a Super Bowl. I think that title is finally off of him. I think that now belongs to Lamar Jackson, especially assuming, from what I'm hearing, Lamar winning his third MVP. Dan Marino won one MVP, and that was this year, and he couldn't cash in a Super Bowl. Lamar's never even been to one, guys. And he could potentially be a 3-time MVP. All the other quarterbacks that are 3-time MVPs won Super Bowls, usually multiple. So I think Dan Marino's got to move over. Lamar's now the best quarterback to never win a Super Bowl, hands down. And Dan Marino's not in my top 10 anymore. It's sacrilegious. So many people have him in their top 5. I can't do it, guys. You cannot put Dan Marino in your top 10. I'm sorry. At some point, winning matters. Phillip Rivers has more career touchdowns than Dan Marino. And they both have the same number of Super Bowls. Okay? Let's go over it. Okay? It's Brady, Montana, Mahomes. Mahomes could move up a little after the newest Super Bowl. Manning. Rodgers. Oh, you don't like Rodgers there? Well, Rodgers has a Super Bowl. He actually won his Super Bowl when he got there. No offense to Dan Marino. And Rodgers has like 80 more touchdowns than him with less interceptions. Favre. Okay. He's got better stats than Marino. And he has a Super Bowl and 3 MVPs. Okay. Does it make sense so far? Elway. Elway went to 5 of these compared to Marino's 1, and he won 2 of them. All right. Unitas. Clutch as hell for his era. He was way ahead of his era, too. Breeze. Again, Breeze sort of looked at as the modern day Marino when he was in the league. Guess what he did? Won a Super Bowl. And then I have Lamar. I would have Marino at 10, but now Lamar's kicked him off the list. So, tell me I'm telling lies. Is Marino better than any of those guys? Is he more accomplished than any of those guys? I don't think so. So, sorry. Dan Marino has, over the years, fallen down my top 10 list, and he's all the way off of it now. Don't hate me. Don't hate the player. Hate the game. We said 49ers got their second Super Bowl. They were starting to establish a dynasty. You'll hear more about that in part 3. But we do have one more Super Bowl to go over before I get out of here. We're just having a candid conversation. I'm not trying to sit here and be super entertaining for y'all or whatever. We're just having a candid conversation. That's this format. And I'll say the Chicago Bears had a candid conversation with my New England Patriots. 46-10. Luckily, I wasn't alive when this happened, or I'd want to unalive myself as a Patriots fan. Because 46-10, total blowout. The Chicago Bears may not have had the best record of all time because the 72 Dolphins had a better record, but many people consider them, deep down, the greatest team of all time. 15-1 in the regular season, completely destroyed everybody they could. You know, William Refrigerator Perry got a touchdown, for God's sake. This game was embarrassing. And kind of sad we have to end the series, part 2, on this game. But we do. The MVP was Richard Dent, defensive end. The Bears' 85 defense was so scary, it was unbelievable. And don't forget, they did the Super Bowl Shuffle commercial. Some of you might remember that. But yeah, the Bears were just a complete nightmare. And even though they scored 46 points, a defensive player still won MVP, Richard Dent. You had Walter Payton as your running back almost as an afterthought because the team was so fucking loaded on defense. Just goes to show you, you don't always need the best quarterback to win. Jim McMahon was perfect for that team, for that situation. Very similar to how Jalen Hurts is perfect for his team, for that situation. There's a lot of similarities between the 85 Bears and the current Eagles. Now, I'm not saying the current Eagles have a defense as good as the 1985 Bears, but I see the similarities here. I do. When you look at the good record, the coach with an attitude, the quarterback that only fits with that organization, the all-time running back, I see it. I see it. And with that, guys, that will end part 2 of this mini-series. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. But for now, I'll see you later. Have a good one.